Is Gran Turismo 7 Simcade? What does Simcade mean? Why are people suspiciously so aroused by the term Simcade? That is the question we're going to be answering in this video. Well, the first part, not the last part. Now, I think the most productive thing to do when it comes to the term Simcade, a term that I don't really like using because I think it's largely useless unless defined very precisely, and people are using it differently all the time, but assuming everyone knows what they mean. But I think the most productive thing to do with the term Simcade is to separate it from the idea of realistic, unrealistic, and training utility or no training utility. So separate those concepts from the term Simcade, and it sort of makes things a lot more easier, a lot more simple, and adds a lot more utility to the word Simcade. And to really think of the term Simcade as a way to define the structural component of a driving video game or even a driving simulator. So perhaps the perfect example of a Simcade title would be the Forza Horizon titles, where structurally you have something there that's accessible to just about anybody, an experienced driving game player, a sim racer, or someone that's never played a driving game in their lives before. Also, you'll find that you can play Forza Horizon really well with a gamepad or a steering wheel. It doesn't really matter. The whole thing is just geared to making a driving experience as open and as accessible as possible, along with having something like a single player, point systems, actual typical arcade and typical game mechanics put within the context of a driving title that has real world car licenses, and everything is named after real world car components. You can upgrade the car engine, you can upgrade the brakes, all the stuff that you'd expect from a real car. And then of course you also have access to adjust car setups and everything. So it does actually have components in Forza Horizon that would train you how a real car operates in many ways, and it does have some components to the handling that is not that far off reality. I think they do actually have quite an advanced tyre model that you can have a debate on if it's what's realistic about it, what isn't realistic about it. As I say, it's useful to push all that to one side when talking about Simcade and focusing more on that overall game-like structure. So I would say, as long as you've got that game-like structure, you then have a Simcade title. So when it comes to Gran Turismo 7, obviously it's a Simcade title. You have real-world locations as well as fictional locations, but they're set in a reality context. You've got real-world cars, car setup options, upgrades and everything, but you have the whole structure there for buying new vehicles, playing through some kind of single player missions, even though it's way worse than the older Gran Turismo games. I think even Gran Turismo fans would say that. You have a game-like structure. Absolutely fantastic to play Gran Turismo on a gamepad. I would argue personally it's probably one of the best handling games on a gamepad, and weirdly, it translates very literally from a gamepad to how you'd expect a car to move. But it can also be played with a steering wheel and pedals and everything. It's very much what I would describe as a Simcade structure to a racing game or a racing simulator. And there will be components of Gran Turismo 7 that are useful and have utility for real world training or as a simulation component. I mean, at its fundamental level, just learning track layouts is something that's really, really useful, and probably one of the biggest cost-effective benefits, especially if you're not a pro driver. If you're completely new to driving and you don't know a track at all, just learning the layout will save you an absolute fortune, and Gran Turismo easily does that. Now, you can get into more murky evaluation of how realistic the tyres are and, absolute simulation of components and all these sorts of things. I personally don't think Gran Turismo is that realistic in an absolute sense, but then again I also think there's hardcore simulators out there, iRacing for example, where at the limit the tyres really are not, in my opinion, realistic whatsoever, even though other components of iRacing's physics I think are quite realistic, and obviously the tracks are very good and everything. But the point is, you can look at individual components, and there's a debate to be had on all those individual components with evidence you could present or good arguments you could present as to the validity of those individual components, either as to if they're realistic or not, or if they have training utility to them or not. And then also you can debate whether or not it's fun or not. And again, that's outside of training utility and absolute simulation utility. There's plenty of games that are abstract racing games that have very, very fun handling mechanics. And then also if they're fun with a gamepad, it might not be fun with a wheel, but it could be really fun with a gamepad, or it might be fun for new drivers or new players, but not particularly fun for more experienced drivers or players. You know, so all these individual points, you can't distill these sorts of things into one term and then expect to have any useful conversation on it. So there you go. What have you learned from this video? Probably absolutely nothing. But Gran Turismo, definitely a Simcade title, and you can argue over how realistic or unrealistic or what's good or bad about it all you want. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. This is going to have delightful comments, I am sure of it. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and click that like button and all that lark. I will see you very soon in our next video. The most important thing is to drink tea and take care. Goodbye, guys.